Hi, welcome to Conversations in Interventional Cardiology. My name is Cindy Grines. I'm the Associate Editor of SCAI and the Chief Scientific Officer at Northside Hospital Heart Institute. I'm honored to represent the SCAI Editor-in-Chief, Dr. Alexandra Lansky, in today's conversation. We're here to discuss an important document published in SCAI titled Clinical Experience with Novel Perfusion Balloon Catheter and Coronary Artery Perforation, the RINGER study. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of experts, Dr. David Kandzari, who is the Director of Interventional Cardiology and Chief at the Piedmont Heart Institute, Dr. Mohammad Alqarqaz, who is an Interventional Cardiology and the Program Director at Henry Ford Hospital, and Dr. Annapoorna Kini, who is a Cath Lab Director and Interventional Cardiology Fellowship Director at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kandzari to start the conversation. David?
Perfect. Thank you, Cindy, Mohammad, and Annapoorna. It's a welcomed opportunity to be with you and participate in a discussion with regard to, as you described, Cindy, a very novel technology, a coronary perfusion balloon for the management of coronary artery perforations. The RINGER perfusion balloon catheter, manufactured by Teleflex, is an 014 guidewire compatible rapid exchange balloon angioplasty catheter constructed of familiar materials of PBACs, but uniquely upon inflation, the catheter adopts a hollow cylinder shape that allows distal coronary perfusion. The device matrix ranges between 2 and 5 millimeters in diameters with two lengths of 20 and 30 millimeters, and the nominal and rated burst pressures are 6 and 8 atmospheres respectively. So the catheter is a highly deliverable, analogous to a balloon angioplasty catheter technology. But again, as illustrated in the right-hand panel, upon inflation, it adopts a cylindrical shape that has the potential to seal a coronary perforation and subsequent hemorrhage, but at the same time permit continuous coronary perfusion. The RINGER coronary perforation study was a first-in-human experience using this technology for the management of coronary perforation, and it was designed as a prospective single-arm study performed at 4 enrolling centers in the United States. And I'm welcomed by Mohammad, part of this discussion, who is one of the co-investigators of these 4 sites. Because coronary perforation, as we all recognize, is a rare yet life-threatening condition and requires immediate attention, prediction of patients for consent prior to a procedure and certainly consent during the active event are not feasible. And therefore, we conducted this study under Food and Drug Administration oversight according to ethic criteria or exemption from informed consent regulations that for emergency research. And this includes a great deal of heavy lifting on behalf of the investigators and their sites with prior community consultation and disclosure activities before beginning the studies. And so we're extremely grateful for the efforts on behalf of the investigators and these investigational sites. The study was also conducted with independent oversight from a clinical events committee, a data safety monitoring committee, and an independent angiographic core laboratory, which was Yale University. Intended to represent a broad, unselected patient population experiencing coronary perforation as a complication of percutaneous intervention, the enrollment criteria were intentionally quite broad, including patients aged 18 or older with coronary perforation as a complication of PCI, and really only excluding any perforation in which the location, at least by the investigator's discretion, might challenge delivery or expansion of the RINGER balloon. The primary endpoint consisted of 3 special elements. First, successful delivery of the RINGER device across the coronary perforation site and with its inflation. Secondly, confirmation angiographically of no extravasation with balloon inflation. And this was defined as a residual Ellis grade 0 or 1 perforation with the RINGER balloon expansion. And third, we wanted to achieve demonstration of TIMI grade 2 or 3 flow with RINGER inflation during the management of the perforation. Perhaps expectedly, lesion characteristics associated with coronary perforation were quite complex. Severe calcification was commonplace, as well as severe tortuosity. One half of the patients had chronic total occlusion, and lesion lengths were long, with an average lesion length of 34 millimeters, and approximately half of the patients having a lesion length of at least 20 millimeters. More than 40% of the patients had diabetes mellitus and a prior history of myocardial infarction, and approximately 1/2 and 1/4 of the patient population had experienced prior percutaneous or surgical coronary revascularization. Overall, the majority of coronary perforations were characterized as Ellis class 2 or 3 perforations, approximately 80% representing type 2 or type 3 perforations. And interestingly, among the 30 patients included in this first-in-human experience, the most common mechanism of coronary perforation was related to balloon angioplasty alone. And indeed, fewer patients, only one patient actually had undergone atherectomy during the study. Procedures to manage the coronary perforation prior to the use of the Ringer device actually were most commonly none. The Ringer device was the first device used to manage the coronary perforation in 1/2 of these 15 of these 30 cases, followed thereafter by the use of balloon angioplasty prior to the use of the Ringer device. But what's also interesting is that if we consider procedures to manage the perforation after the use of the Ringer device, nearly 1/2, that is 14 of 30 patients, required no additional treatment, such as a covered stent placement, which was used in 40% of the cases, or any other intervention. Pericardiocentesis was performed in 7 of the 30 patients, or 23%, and this occurred during varied time points relative to the use of the Ringer device, sometimes beforehand, sometimes during Ringer inflation, or in some instances thereafter. Moreover, when we evaluate the primary endpoint of the study, specifically by the intention to treat principle, where we're including all 30 patients, the primary efficacy endpoint was met in 22 of the 30 patients, that is 73%. More specifically, the Ringer device delivery was unsuccessful in 4 of the 30 patients. Therefore, successful delivery was 87%. And among the 22 patients who were of the 26 treated with the Ringer device, angiographic confirmation of sealing of the perforation was achieved in 22 of the 30 patients, and TIMI grade 2 or 3 flow was demonstrated in 26 of the 30 patients. It's important to note that the total inflation time of the Ringer device on average was 20 minutes, but this extended in one particular patient, for example, up to 60 minutes of continuous inflation time, but again, permitting antegrade coronary flow during Ringer balloon inflation. As a secondary pre-specified analysis, however, we also wanted to examine the primary efficacy endpoint relative to the assessable subjects. And put simply, this represents the 26 of the 30 patients for whom the Ringer device was actually delivered to the perforation site and with successful balloon expansion. And to that end, therefore, Ringer delivery was 100%, or 26 of the 26 patients. But among the 26 patients for whom were actually treated with the Ringer device, confirmation of extravasation sealing was achieved in 85% of these patients, or 22 of the 26 patients, and TIMI grade 2 to 3 antegrade flow during Ringer inflation was observed in all 26 patients. It's important to note, too, that use of the Ringer device in this limited study appeared very safe. There were no device-related adverse events or dissections or other complications related to the Ringer device itself. These figures simply represent in a static image the utilization of the Ringer device, and specifically this is a right coronary artery total occlusion in which on the left-hand panel a guide wire is advanced using a microcatheter, but after balloon inflation was complicated by coronary perforation highlighted by the red arrows. The Ringer device was then immediately placed in the coronary artery, in this in this instance, in the mid portion of the right coronary artery. You may appreciate a lucency in the mid portion of the right coronary artery, which is simply the ringer balloon inflated, but it permits complete antegrade flow as demonstrated in this image. And this is one of the particular instances of nearly half of the cases in which, after the ringer balloon was removed, no further intervention, including even stent placement, was performed. Overall, the study dedicated to examining also clinical events during hospitalization demonstrated that among the 30 patients, there were 3 episodes of death, 1 myocardial infarction, and 1 instance of emergency surgery. And just to share a little bit more detail of these 3 instances of death, 1 was related to cardiogenic shock due to progressive left ventricular failure and myocardial infarction. Another was related to the case of emergency surgery, and this was not related to none of these were related to the ringer device specifically by adjudication, but this was actually an iatrogenic right ventricular perforation during attempted pericardiocentesis that then went on to surgery, and the patient later passed. And the third instance is a case of a coronary perforation in an additional vessel that was not treated with the ringer device. So this was a case with 2 coronary perforations. The ringer device was successfully used in one of the perforations, but a second perforation ultimately led to a patient demise. So in summary, in a multi-center prospective study of patients treated for coronary perforation in the setting of what we would deem real-world clinical practice, the use of this novel Ringer perfusion balloon catheter was associated with favorable delivery and successful sealing of the perforation site while maintaining antegrade coronary flow during, in many instances, quite prolonged durations of balloon inflation. And specifically among the cases, as I've shared with you, of successful delivery, catheter delivery across the perforation site, sealing of the perforation was achieved in 85% of the cases, and achievement of TIMI grade 2 or 3 flow simultaneously was observed in all of the cases. No further intervention, too, interestingly, was required in nearly half of the cases following prolonged balloon inflation with the Ringer device. And altogether, these findings, I think, are very supportive with regard to the use of the Ringer perfusion catheter as a new tool, as an additional tool in the armamentarium to safely and effectively manage coronary perforation until definitive treatment is determined.
Excellent presentation, and that's a real, very, very interesting study. David, I wanted to ask you, we had used perfusion balloons in the past, but they were big and bulky and really quite difficult to deliver. And then the antegrade flow was a trickle at best. I wondered if there's any other catheters out there right now to help interventional cardiologists manage these perforations.
That's a great beginning of our discussion, Cindy, because really to date, no other, in the United States at least, no other balloon technologies or catheter-based technologies are approved for the management of coronary perforation and while enabling simultaneous antegrade coronary flow. We have, of course, covered stents, the papyrus stent and the Joe stents that are approved under humanitarian device exemption, but we have really no other balloon technologies or other stent-like technologies specifically for the management of perforation under a PMA approval.
And I'm going to ask Mohammad, since you were involved in the study and you treated many of these patients, do you have any tips for our audience on which type of coronaries would be appropriate for this use of this device and which ones where we may avoid using this device?
Thank you, Cindy, for having us today. And I would like first to thank David for his exceptional leadership of this study. As he already alluded to, the coronary perforation, unfortunately, is a complication that is associated with high morbidity and mortality, and that has not changed over time and over the years. So it's definitely a welcome addition that there is more interest in developing devices dedicated to treat this dreaded complication. So back to your question. So I think, first of all, I think as we all know in the field of interventional cardiology, there's not going to be one device or tool that is suitable to be used in every case and every clinical scenario. So clinical judgment has to be exercised, obviously. obviously. But from a technical standpoint, obviously, I think the operator has to be aware that the location of the perforation is in a segment in the vessel where the balloon can be delivered to, so that basically excludes maybe like very distal branch perforations where you can deliver the balloon to. Also, I think we have to be very careful about identifying the perforation location, because when you deliver the balloon and you inflate it, you have to be sure that you are actually sealing the location of the perforation, because I think if you inflate the balloon and then you discover that you have to adjust the balloon, then pushing it more distally after inflation is probably going to be more challenging. The last thing I would say that also sizing is very important. So the operators have to know the appropriate size of the vessel to choose, that the appropriate size of the bringer balloon as well. In our experience, I mean, this has to be at least 1-to-1 sizing, and maybe even increasing the size by 0.5 millimeters for balloon to the artery size, I think will allow for much better sealing and tamponading of the perforation.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions. One was, nicely done study. This complication is rare, but devastating. All the steps to be done when a perforation happens should be very clear. So essentially, perforation could be device related or wire related. So in wire related, usually they are side branch, or then they are distal, which is distal, PDA, where the wires are branches of the PDA, distal circumflex, or distal part of the apical LAD. So by placing a perfusion balloon, do you think it's going to help? Because normally we need a balloon that completely stops the blood flow to that area. That's number one. And number two is, what was the anticoagulation that was used in the procedure, Angiomax versus regular heparin, and how was it reversed?
Great points from both of you. So just to begin with, the coronary perforations that we experienced in this first-in-human experience with the Ringer device were all sidewall related perforations and free perforations. And however, I think what we're all in agreement is that if it's a guide wire related small branch perforation, the Ringer device is not going to effectively seal that as a mechanism to enable coronary perfusion at the same time, although you can envision instances, for instance, where a diagonal branch may have a perforation, and just in the immediacy of managing the perforation, you could place the Ringer device in the left anterior descending artery, seal off flow to that diagonal branch until further determination of next steps are needed. I think one of the important points that we all recognize in coronary perforation is that hemodynamic collapse can be quite imminent and rapid, and we're limited in our current inventory of technologies and strategies to manage coronary perforations, oftentimes by deliverability of existing technologies, their limited effectiveness in many instances, and sometimes their lack of being readily available in the cath labs as well. And one of the advantages of the Ringer device is that it's, put simply, a balloon angioplasty catheter, although uniquely designed, and so it's readily available. It could be implemented in all cath labs. It can be, it's familiar. Its preparation is something, and use is something very familiar to interventional cardiologists as well. And one other unique aspect I'd point out about the Ringer device is that, and I agree with Mohammad, is that there were instances in which two Ringer devices were used, and oftentimes that was associated with upsizing the diameter of the Ringer device just for more complete and effective sealing as well. But one of the other important points or advantages of this technology I'd point out is that you can leave the Ringer device inflated. It's permitting antegrade flow. You can pass other stents, other guide wires through the Ringer device at the same time. So you could deliver, for instance, just distal to the Ringer, through the same guide catheter, perhaps a covered stent, and then deflate the ringer and then pull back the covered stent and deploy it. You could even, we didn't do this in this trial, but in preclinical studies, you can place two ringer devices in tandem to create a longer sealing for a more extensive tear that might be commonplace in, for example, a venous bypass graft as well. And again, the ringer device as a balloon, low profile balloon catheter, it's compatible with all guide extensions and with smaller guiding catheters as well. So I think there's a lot of universal features to the technology too. Briefly, Annapoorna, I believe in all, if nearly all of the cases were related to the use of unfractionated heparin. And, you know, a commonplace in the management of perforation, we really don't want to reverse the anticoagulation until all the hardware is out of the coronary artery to minimize the risk of thrombosis.
That's very impressive. I never even thought about delivering additional devices through the ringer. So it acts more as a support, an extra support catheter in that regard.
And a conduit, yeah, to deliver, again, other balloons, other stents, guide wires through the ringer device while leaving it inflated at the same time.
No, so I think I agree with David in regarding his comments about anticoagulation. We don't reverse until we are, have successfully treated the complication and we're ready to remove the gear out of the coronaries, because I think that can be associated with its own set of thrombosis and other complications. So, perforation is obviously challenging by itself, but sometimes it happens like really at the worst time of the procedure. For example, like I remember a case clearly where we were just starting to prep the vessel more proximal, and then we had to deal with a mid-segment perforation. So even delivering a covered stent would have been very challenging through the proximal disease that we have not treated yet. So I think the ringer balloon will give you time and so that you can see the perforation, maybe work on other segments of the vessel without obviously inducing ischemia and its own complications. So I think it's definitely a welcome addition to our toolbox in terms of managing perforations. There are very challenging clinical scenarios, for example, when the perforation is at a major bifurcation point where you really don't want to put a covered stent from the get-go and maybe lose that branch. So again, the ringer balloon in those scenarios may give you time. You can inflate and see if that helps treat the perforation without putting a covered stent and losing that side branch. So it's definitely going to have its place in the toolbox for managing coronary perforations. As I said at the beginning, again, it's probably not going to be suitable for every case of clinical perforation, but definitely it's going to be a very important tool for managing those complications.
Yeah, I completely agree, Mohammad. And just to expand on some of your comments too, that there are many secondary complications of coronary perforation too. As evidenced in this trial, we had a right ventricular perforation from attempted pericardiocentesis, the need for emergency surgery. There's sometimes in instances of need for additional catheter-based hemodynamic support, which can introduce their own complications and challenges. And so although this study by all means was not designed to examine clinical outcomes or compare to other technologies or strategies, of course, it's notable, though, that if you have an average duration of balloon inflation of 20 minutes and up to 60 minutes in one particular case, I think we would all agree that patients don't tolerate that from an ischemic injury perspective. And that's one of the challenges with the most common method of conventional balloon angioplasty inflation, as an initial step, at least to manage perforations, is the sequela or the consequences of prolonged balloon inflation, which are now obviated by a technology that enables, as in this instance, continuous coronary flow.
Obviously, the study was mostly a feasibility and safety study, but I think hopefully down the road we'll have more data on its clinical use from maybe registries and more dedicated studies with larger number of patients to confirm the safety and efficacy of the device.
Excellent points. So if there are no other comments, I just wanted to thank Dr. Kandzari and the rest of the panel for this very, very interesting study. And I really look forward to having this ringer device FDA approved and on the shelves of all cath labs.